Hi, AP friends. Today we're taking a look at 18th century Europe, and specifically we'll be looking at agriculture and kind of the classes within society during that time period. Full disclosure, some of the information from this PowerPoint came from a presentation done by Tom Ritchie, so if you're feeling so inclined, feel free to check that out. He also has a video up that does a pretty nice job as well. So powers during this time period, as we've discussed previously, included Britain, um, Prussia, Austria, Russia, and France. Those are the five big ones. Those are the five main ones. I included the Dutch in here, kind of, sort of. While they are declining, the capital of Amsterdam is still the economic power and really is going to be the economic center, the economic hub of Europe, all the way up into the early part of the 1800s when London finally surpasses it. As we look there, just kind of a recap of the economic system that I just mentioned. We also are shifting in Europe in terms of banking from coinage to credit. Remember, bullion is being held by a lot of these European powers in accordance with the tenets of mercantilism. And because of that, in order to transfer money back and forth, it actually becomes easier to deal with and issue credit as opposed to simply using actual bullion or coinage itself. And so we see the influx of that, and your textbook does a decent job of mentioning that and kind of going over that pattern. We also see the cottage industry, specifically in terms of textiles and cloth, where we're going to talk more about how people are becoming more entrepreneurial, and this is relating to the beginnings of capitalism within Europe. And so we see the ideas of Adam Smith start to be put into play here, at least on a microeconomic level, where within an industry itself or within a nation state itself. And so what would happen is an entrepreneur would purchase the raw materials, in this case wool, and then ship the wool out to different people who could then spin it in their own homes, hence cottage industry. They would do it in their own cottages. The entrepreneur would then either purchase or take it back from those people and then sell it as a profit. So the entrepreneur himself is not actually doing any of the work, but is simply supplying the means through which the materials are collected, produced, and distributed. Some different types of inventions during this time period make things a little bit easier in terms of textiles. We have the spinning jenny, which is going to come up. Here you have an image of a machine that is being used to create wool here, and it's doing so through the use of water. It's mentioned in your textbook a couple of different times. We also have the flying shuttle, not that flying shuttle, but the shuttle on a loom, which makes it easier to weave. And so all of these things together are combining and making things a little bit different in the industry of production. This is kind of the proto industrial revolution phase where we're starting to see some of the basic ideas and some of the things that are going to be so important to the industrial revolution start to crop up. This is also the time period. So this is running parallel to the Enlightenment time period, really. So we're talking the 1700s, the 18th century. Okay, this agricultural revolution, sort of in quotes here, is starting in the late 1600s, and it's a revolution that we're not really sure whether it's actually a revolution or not. We don't see necessarily sustained growth across all of Europe, so I don't know if it makes lasting changes enough to say that it's a European revolution in terms of agriculture. It's really just England and the Low Countries, low being elevation, below sea level, that kind of thing. That's the Netherlands and almost Belgium. This is what one of the documents in your KEP packet was talking about, where we see the English trying to make fun of the French and saying that the English system is better. It's based on four main things: more farmland, increased yields. You can read, some of these definitions in there, but more and better livestock and better climate. We're moving away from the little ice age little by little here, and so when the temperatures increase, we're going to see an increase in the production of crops as well. The population growth that comes out of this that we've talked about before is going to eventually help to lead to the Industrial Revolution by providing the amount of workers that would be needed in the cities in order to produce those goods. The old system put in place, this is really going from medieval Europe onward. Large, open, communal fields. You had peasants who would work the fields, and they didn't own the land. The lords owned this large scope of land, and people would kind of share it, and you'd have animals grazing, and here's the wheat farm. And you can see this in Peter Bruegel, The Elders, painting here the corn harvest. The peasants are kind of laying down. Some of them are working. They're going through their work. There's no real incentive to maximize efficiency or production in this style of system. This system is a three-field rotating system. You have your large, enormous field divided up into three parts. One is going to be growing wheat, one oats, and the other one is going to be what we call lying fallow, meaning it's not being used at that time to ensure that nutrients can get back into the soil. If you don't allow or produce nutrients back into the soil or introduce nutrients back into the soil, what you end up with is a situation like the Dust Bowl, where the land no longer becomes arable, no longer becomes farmable. It's led to low yields overall, and if you think about it, it makes sense. You're not using one third of your land for an entire year, every year. So really, that's not an efficient way of doing things, and it really lends itself to this idea of serfdom. Again, not pushing yourself to maximize in any way, shape, or form. The new way is going to be what you see here. Tom Ritchie uses the acronym SET, and I like it a lot. So we're going to use that acronym as well. Scientific. I guess maybe it's influenced by the scientific revolution. Hashtag sarcasm. Um, this is also, again, as I said, going along with the Enlightenment. So we're right in that sweet spot of the time period there. It's going to be entrepreneurial. So people are looking to try and make money, not just simply subsist. And it's going to be technological. So we'll see some of the technological innovations that go with it. Starting in the mid to latter parts of the 17th century, it is a four-field system, and each field is being used every year. You can see kind of the breakdown over here on the side in this diagram. One field will be used for wheat, one for barley, one for turnips, one for clover. Now, the clover and the turnips are really, really important because they introduce nitrogen back into the soil. That is a nutrient that we need that element in there in order to have these nutrients that can allow barley and wheat to grow. And by doing that, you can utilize all of your fields every year. You don't have to let one of your fields be fallow. So we have these new things here. We have a turnip down here at the bottom, and they're going to be used, and that really kind of changes the game. So we're applying science to agriculture at this point. Another way in which we see this is through the selective breeding of livestock. There's a genetic defect that results in the Belgian blue cow. Look at how beefy this dude is over here compared to a normal cow. It looks like he is on creatine. He's on steroids. And these are going to produce more meat. In addition, you're going to be able to have more of them. Instead of just letting nature run its course, you're going to select which genes move forward. Here we have, as my stupid little joke, a normal human, and then a Belgian in blue. That is Jean-Claude Van Damme, aka the muscles from Brussels. You can see how this results because in addition to just the meat from the livestock, you're also going to produce more manure, which you can then reintroduce into the soil to fertilize the soil. So as you look at the crop yields over here, you can take a peek and really see the difference from, say, the early part of the 1600s to the latter parts of the 1700s and 1800s. You're talking about almost doubling your yield. It is also, in addition to being scientific, it is also entrepreneurial. People are looking to make money. Unfortunately for the peasant class, that really means the aristocracy and the nobility. We see what is called the Enclosure Movement. So instead of large open communal field, we have segmented fields in an effort to try and maximize the gains that can be made from agriculture. It's more efficient. It's also more market oriented. So we see Mr. Adam Smith over here, his ideas, including laissez-faire economics, letting the market, the invisible hand, drive pricing, start to creep its way into microeconomics in Europe. Again, this is only in a few select countries, and in general, we don't see capitalism as a global idea until later. It is still mercantilism, which is driving country to country trade, but within countries, we're starting to see some of these capitalist ideas. Unfortunately, this is going to hurt poorer farmers. They don't have access to the same types of farmland to let their animals graze, etc. That land is now being owned by nobility. They are consolidating that land. They are trying to grow their wealth, not simply just have the most wheat possible. So again, this fits in with a more capitalistic society, but for the poor farmers, we're going to see a lot of joblessness that comes out of this. People who are willing to work but are unable to work or don't have access to work. And so we start to see a movement into the cities, and with that, these things that are called workhouses for the jobless people who are able to work. The third letter, the T in SET, is for technology or technological innovations. We see Jethro Tull, not the band, but the actual person, inventing things like the hoe to turn over the soil to, again, make sure that the nutrients stay in. In addition, instead of simply sprinkling seeds wherever all across the land, You now have his seed drill that you see here in the middle. It places divots and then fills those divots with the seeds necessary. So now you're really trying to apply the ideas of the scientific revolution and in terms of how to make things better and constant improvement to not just theoretical means like, say, astronomy, but to actual um, tangible means. We also have the portable threshing machine as another example. Again, you can check that out in your textbook or online. Population growth. So we do see a growth in population. That's the first document that you saw. And it starts here with the decline in death rate, thanks in part to the last outbreak of bubonic plague in 1720. Uh, that particular disease kind of goes away. We still have issues, obviously, tuberculosis being a major one, smallpox being another. We do see an increase in food, which means more people can be supported by the agricultural systems, and also transportation of food. So if there's a famine in one spot, you can transport the food to the other and make sure that people don't starve to death. Agricultural improvements, we mentioned, it's going to lead to that influx in people needed for the Industrial Revolution. We still have high infant death, both from uh, single mothers, unwed families, children being dropped off in these kind of orphanage type places where the children are really 85 to 90% of them are going to die in those things. We also see people marrying later in life, so birth control. So while it is a population boom, it's not a full-on explosion of population yet. Society itself, we start to see more and more class division. The peasants don't really see any net gain from all of this. And in the East, we don't really see any of this going on. It's still kind of status quo in places like Russia and Poland, etc. We do see an increase in poverty, especially people who are willing to work and unable to find work. For the aristocracy, increase in wealth, larger farms. Um, there's really kind of two types of aristocracies, and we'll get into this when we start talking about the French Revolution. The old sword nobles, who got their nobility by fighting for the king and being rewarded with knighthood, and the new people who are basically purchasing their nobility through wealth that they are gaining. They look to things like privacy, building these country houses. Think Downton Abbey is a pretty good example, even though it's a later time period, where you have this large estate giving you some privacy, some parkland, etc. That's also forcing people to move off of that land. The peasants are basically forced to move, again, leading to them to migrate to the cities. People would go on these grand tours, those are mentioned in your textbook, as a way to kind of grow up into adulthood. Um, this is all going to lead to increased tensions. How are these nobles going to kick me off my land and tell me I'm not allowed to farm there anymore? It's going to create some tension in some different areas. We also have rural versus urban split. Urban is only 15% of the population, but as I've been mentioning, it is gaining at this point. The rural is going to be hurt most by the Little Ice Age famine. That's really not going to have as big of an effect on the nobility. For the women, they are still kind of reduced to the household roles that we've seen traditionally. They are going to get involved, agriculturally speaking, if they have to for their family. Here we have a nice little diagram showing kind of the different class breakdown. You have the king at the top, clergy, and the nobility. Then we have the merchant class, and then finally the peasant class down here at the bottom. And you can see the weight of these situations is kind of starting to crush the peasantry. And so this is a pretty good example. This comes from the 18th century in Germany. Nobility, as I mentioned, perks included military offices, even though they might not have experience. Daddy paid for it, and that creates some issues with the enlisted men who maybe work their way up and can only get up to a captain. Purchasing of the nobility, especially in France, as I mentioned, yet even though the nobility has the most riches, they pay the least taxes. And again, this will come up in the French Revolution, but it's going to drive some wedges between them and the peasantry, and also lead to poor economic situations in France. Land rights, the nobility, if they purchase land, sometimes nobility is attached to it. That's a big time perk as well. And so again, even though we have the nobility, we're going to see a split between the old and new nobles. We saw that move to privacy, and for the nobility, the more food they have, the better food they have, especially meat, the more healthy they are going to be. So we have this nice Rococo painting up here just as kind of a reminder of the art periods we're talking about. We see some of that frivolity amongst the noble classes. So that's what we have for the 18th century. Again, this is going right along with chapter 18 in your textbook. If you have any questions, as always, please let me know, and I hope you all have a great day.